So, you know, as I do, there are a lot of legendary combinations. You got salt and vinegar, peanut butter and jam, Hall & Oates, Batman and Robin, wine and cheese, and I would throw in there summer and music. So whether it's road trips, quiet evenings, backyard barbecues, summer and music, for whatever reason, just seem to work very well together. Summer gives the reasons, we could say, and music helps to capture the moments. They are etched into our memory with these soundtracks that seem to stamp them eternally with us. They define eras, they define moments in history, ups and downs, etc., etc. And so being now that we are in summer, it seems a fitting time to spend some time with the music. So we are going to begin the summer song series today. I was delighted. Scott told me he woke up today so excited for summer song series. That's a nice thing to hear. I don't hear that a lot with other series, so thanks, Scott, for that. If you're familiar with our church, you know I've been doing this most summers for nearly 10 years now. If you're new, I hope you love the series as much as I tend to love putting them together. What we're going to do this summer, last year, if you remember, we did Simon and Garfunkel, focusing just on those artists throughout the whole thing. This year we're going to change it, and we're going to span about 90 years of music. We're going to consider what people were singing about almost 100 years ago, the joys, the sorrows, the hopes, and the fears that span from then right until today. We're going to consider that these songs and the stories that they tell really are not new. They've been on repeat for millennia. They echo humanity's ancient, enduring journey. They are the commentaries of people, flesh and blood, men and women, who have universal aches, have experienced joys and defeats and victories in a world that has wrestled with pain and injustice and uncertainty for a very long time. These anthems, I think, consciously or not, contain deep hope for truth and redemption, for something to make sense of the season that we're in. And I think that whether the music is explicitly Christian or what we would classify as secular, if we hang out with these songs long enough, you always find that they ultimately will point us towards some type of conversation with God that's bigger than just the story of the song itself. So that's the big idea of the series. Without further ado, I introduce you to our first song of this summer series, which is the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy of Company B. yeah, exactly. Yes, woo! So this song was first made famous by the Andrews Sisters, a trio of singing siblings. These ladies were hugely popular during the World War II era. They recorded over 600 songs. They sold 90 million records, and they earned 15 gold record awards, which are seriously impressive numbers. And it goes on. The Andrews Sisters had 46 top 10 hits, which is more than Elvis ever had or the Beatles ever had. So arguably their most famous song is the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy. Bette Midler did it, I think, in 1971, and also, I guess, added to its fame and its connection to culture and history. The lyrics were written by two men, Don Ray and Huey Prince. That's like a great World War II era name, Huey Prince. The song first appeared, as they tended to do at this time, not on the radio, but actually in a movie, an Abbott and Costello movie. And before I say this, I just want to say this is a bit of an awkward movie title, so forgive me for blushing, but the movie was called Buck Privates. I was warned Joanne would laugh. So if you've not seen that movie, good news, there's Buck Privates 1 and a sequel. But this song was in that movie, and so the clip you're going to see, I believe, is in fact from that movie. And so without making you wait any longer, here you go. If you've not heard it, Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy of Company B.
He was a famous trumpet man from out Chicago way. He had a boogie style that no one else could play. He was the top man at his craft. But then his number came up and he was gone with the draft. He's in the army now, a blowing reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. They made him blow a bugle for his Uncle Sam. It really brought him down because he couldn't jam. The captain seemed to understand. Because the next day the cat went out and drafted a band. And now the company jumps when he plays reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. A toot, a toot, a toot, a toot, he blows it into the bar. In boogie rhythm, he can't blow a note unless the bass and guitar is playing rhythm. He makes the company jump when he plays reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. He was the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. And when he played boogie woogie bugle, he was busy as a blues bee. And when he plays, he makes the company jump into the bar. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. He blows it into the bar. You can't blow it now, just the bass and guitar is in with the company jumps when he plays reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. He puts the boys to sleep with boogie every night and wakes them up the same way in the early right. They clap their hands and stamp their feet because they know how he plays. When someone gives him a beat, he really breaks it up when he plays reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B.
So you're welcome, because I expect that will be on all your road trip playlists now, your backyard barbecues. It's a fascinating song because it is very joyful, it's very upbeat, and yet it's actually telling a fairly sad story. And it was speaking to a moment and a point in human history that was very much in the thick of war. So we have this catchy rhythm. And in that catchy rhythm, there's this resonance for families who were seeing their sons enlist or be drafted, potentially against their will, into military service. And specifically, of course, like all war, a very uncertain future. Now, I think the Andrews sisters do a pretty good job of putting sort of a optimistic and hopeful spin on the ugliness of war and the times in which we feel as though we are out of control. So the song is a story about this famous trumpet man from Chicago. Of course he would be from Chicago. He's drafted into military service, which meant that he had to lay the jazz solos aside and instead play these bugle calls of American might. So he couldn't jam, we're told specifically, and he had to blow reveille. His skills were stifled, his passion is muted, and though it wasn't what he wanted, trained for, expected, he eventually finds a way to experience joy and purpose in a season that he didn't choose. Now, I don't think any of us have lived this experience exactly. We certainly have all felt drafted into seasons that we didn't expect. And maybe it was a season where you felt specifically that your talents were wasted, that your purpose was unclear, that your rhythm had been disrupted. It's a common human experience and a topic that the Bible has lots to say about, front to back, really. And so this morning, Ecclesiastes 3 and the Bugle Boy are going to remind us that every season, even the tough ones, have an appointed purpose according to God's perfect plan. So we'll just read the 14 verses or so of Ecclesiastes 3. You probably know it well. There is a time for everything, which is quite a staggering statement. I mean, again, we move off these verses so quickly, but if we just stop there and think about it for a second, there is a time for everything. And a season for every activity under the heavens, which is really just a way of saying of human experience. There's a time to be born and there is a time to die. There is a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down, a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love, time to hate. A time for war, time for peace. Then we find a question: what do workers gain from their toil? I've seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it so that people will fear him. So let me distill this timeless poetry down into sort of a blue-collar definition that helps me understand what the big idea is here. Life throws stuff at you. Life throws stuff at you. There is a time for everything chosen and not chosen. We don't pick necessarily when we cry. We don't pick when we experience some type of break or loss. And we also don't necessarily experience times of joy or dancing or embracing people or embracing experiences. As this preacher points out, our work often feels temporary. We can't always see the big picture, the meaning. And these regular reminders that the seasons of life bring tend to put us in our place, showing that we are not in charge, never were in charge, never will be in charge. But here's the thing about this chapter and the big idea behind this preacher's wisdom is that God's control over times and seasons, even though, and I love this about Ecclesiastes, at times can feel frustrating. That's actually, though, the place, the idea, the wisdom where we find peace and security. When we feel pressed and confused, or alternatively, we find humility because when we feel we're in a good season, an unshakable moment of goodness, that's mostly a result of our good choices and our success. In all of that, this idea of not being in control is ultimately a path to peace and security, to faithfulness, to hope, etc., etc. And so Ecclesiastes, generally speaking, is a little bit of a downer book at times. I heard one person say that's one of the things that they like about Ecclesiastes is it's kind of the realist perspective on life. And yet this chapter isn't meaningless. It's not intended to be a downer, in my opinion. It is a solution for the downer that is discontentment. It's a solution, an invitation to perseverance. It's an invitation to praise God in the good, but also in the bad. So here's our sermon in a sentence for this morning. In every season, joyful or painful, expected or not, God appoints it with purpose. And he invites us not to resist. Which, let me just say, we resist both the good and bad at times. No, I don't deserve this. No, don't take care of me. No, don't let that blessing come my way. And of course, we also resist the bad. But to trust, adapt, and faithfully participate in his unfolding rhythm. So our first point, fairly straightforward, obvious. Everyone knows this. The question is, do we believe it, and do we find the right meaning out of it? God alone sets our seasons. I'll just say I will not touch on every verse that we read today. If I were to do that, we would be here well into next week. Each verse could be its own sermon. And so I am going to speak more to the overarching general idea of the passage that we read, okay? So God alone sets our seasons. So my oldest daughter, Ella, graduated high school this week. And as you can understand, being a parent of a child that has now graduated from grade school on to what's next, I've been thinking a lot about changing seasons. The futility of trying to control time and seasons. When Ella was little, just one, her first favorite show was a show called The Backyardigans. And in case you're not familiar with it, you really missed out. These were 5 preschool-aged animals: a penguin, a hippo, a moose. I think the moose's name was Tyrone, which I always liked. And they would go on different adventures in their backyards. And so they'd go out and they'd have imaginative play, and they'd go on these incredible adventures, and the adventures always included pretty good music, to be honest. Lots of different styles, and so she loved it. She just loved it. And so being that the seasons are changing, I found myself driving to her graduation ceremony, the one where they wear the fancy clothes, by myself, because that's the dad's lot in life. Everyone had gone ahead and told me where to meet them. So I'm driving alone by myself, and I thought, well, what should I listen to? And so you know what I put on? I put on the Backyardigans soundtrack, just for old time's sake, just as a moment to mark the changing of the seasons, just for the memory, just to hang out in that space again. And I think just to probably in some weird way remind myself that that season is ending. And so if we're going to sing a song, let's sing the Backyardigans. It was a big part of the beginning. So the long season of grade school has now ended for Ella and our house, and the shorter season of grade 12, which is this anticipatory year to the end, it's ended. And then the even shorter season that is the grad week events came and went very, very quickly. And the hundreds of dollars that I spent now sits in a bag in a closet. Yeah. And so the end of the season brings celebration, but it brings exhaustion. It brings sadness, as you remember, but it also brings joy. And I think it's a little bit like living in those warm winter days or those cold summer days where it's not black and white. It's not one or the other, where it is in the same space, two things at once. And so on a graduation day, you can be proud and sad. You can be tired and yet not sleepy. You can be nervous and excited. And I think it is possible that in the seasons of life, it is true that they can even carry more than one purpose at the same time. And the speaker in Ecclesiastes, a guy who is known as Kohelet, he's got this job in the book to basically help the reader get to the point where they understand what wisdom is, what the purpose of God is, what the purpose of man is. And so all throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, he's helping us to come to see ultimately what he calls the sum of the matter, which is to fear God and to serve him forever. So every chapter, Ecclesiastes 3 included, is just his way of getting us to that conclusion. And for us today, then, we hear this preacher, this wise teacher, open with a truth that should change the way we see the world, which is for everything there is a season, for everything, a time for every activity under heaven. And so more than a thought about change, or about even how I navigate seasons, which it does tell me, this is ultimately a huge statement about God running the show, about God's sovereignty over every human life and every human endeavor. God alone determines every season, and the promise that there will be a time for everything. And I think that statement, if considered long enough, should give us pause. When we, in pain or confusion, protest, this shouldn't happen, or this was never part of the plan. Because I think to those protests, Ecclesiastes would ask you, why not? Why not now? Why isn't this part of the plan? There's a season for everything. So why not? I think it should also produce humility for us when life is going well, and we're happy, and we're settled, and we're content, and we feel like we're winning, and we feel like the plan, all 5 years of them, are all just lining up accordingly. In that moment, humility should come because we should confess, all of this was just God's appointment for me. I might have been faithful in it, and that's important, but ultimately this is God's design. It's not me. I just stewarded what He gave me. Now, when we talk about seasons, and specifically as is used here in Ecclesiastes and in the Old Testament at large, we're not just speculating about a broader meaning. This isn't just a metaphor or an analogy. When they say season, there is a time, a season for everything. There is a specific meaning here. The Hebrew word actually means an appointed time that has been ordered by God. There is an appointed time ordered by God for everything. Seasons in the biblical sense then are way less about chance, and they are much more about pre-planned moments according to God's infinite wisdom, not just for a moment or a year or this particular time in human history, but God's infinite wisdom and His perfect plan for both, amazingly, the world, the city, our community, and our very personal life. And so every life shift, every stage, every situation is in fact an appointment, not an accident, which is much different way to view the world and to consider time than our Western individualistic, be whatever you want to be, reach for the stars culture. Because Ecclesiastes highlights that our fundamental human limitation with time is very real. And if you contrast that against God's transcendence over time itself, well, then we see that time ultimately is in control, not us. And God is ultimately in control of time. And if that's true, if all of that's true, and let's just entertain that it might be, then wisdom's to live as if life brings joy and sorrow. And sometimes it brings it at the same time. If you've lived long enough, you know that you can be in a season where grandchildren are being born and parents are passing away. All at the same time, sometimes in the same week. It's not then to let the hard seasons become our story, which in our trauma-informed culture tends to be. I am what happened to me. The great psychotherapist Carl Jung said, it's actually not what happened to you that makes you you. It's what you did with it. And I like that because I think that that's what Ecclesiastes is talking about. It's not just what happens, it's what do we do within the time, in that space. We want to hold the good seasons loosely. And we want to not be defeated by the worst of life, going, now I am this. God's plan for us is that there are seasons of building and seasons of tearing down, and sometimes at the same time. There are times of living, there are times of dying, there are times of hellos, and there are times of goodbyes, each at its appointed time, proper time. We are creatures of time. The writer in Ecclesiastes says that we have not yet come to enjoy eternity, which is why eternity is in our hearts. You see, we live as if it'll be forever. That's what he's saying. It's in your heart because you're going, I'm going to live. This is eternal. It's in us to live eternal, but the reality is our context isn't yet eternal. That's still to come. And so things here tend to be fleeting, temporary, hello, goodbye, tear down, come to life, etc., etc., etc. Life will always bring change, sorrow, continuity, and joy. You know, it's interesting. Chantel and I, when we were first married, worked for a company where we would go into high schools and present these sort of positive life choice messages, like don't drink and drive. It was sponsored by Mothers Against Drinking and Driving, and it would have testimonies from families who'd lost a son or a daughter or a loved one to drinking and driving. And without fail, every person's testimony would say something like this, which is common of anyone that has experienced tragedy. I never thought it would happen to me. Fascinatingly, the same confession is made with like lottery winners. People who win like lottery 649. I never thought it would happen to me. I never thought that this dream type experience could be reality. For good or for bad. It seems that us humans then want to put seasons in the guaranteed column and some in the not likely column. Likely we won't suffer. Likely we won't get too bad of a disease too early. Likely our children will grow up well and won't make any mistakes. And then the unlikely column, things like, becoming accidentally incredibly rich. Probably not. And so, while circumstances differ from one family or one person to another, there are no exemptions. There is a time for everything. Ecclesiastes 1 says every activity, our desires, our purposes, everything we do. The teacher says every action, planned or not, fits into God's ultimate ordained times. And I think what I find maybe amusingly refreshing about this, and maybe you will too, is that it challenges both the free spirit and the pragmatist alike. Everybody's challenged by this. You see, our lives aren't as messy or as self-directed as we tend to believe they are. They're woven into God's detailed plan. And so the free spirit has to come to the point of going, well, I'm actually not that free. And the control freak has to come to the point and go, and I'm not actually that in control. Both types need to learn to be okay with it. You don't get to be as messy and you don't get to be as tight. There's a time for everything. We also find this wise perspective in the broad truth found in this passage that God's purpose for every person is intimately linked with time. His purposes are revealed and accomplished in minutes, in days, in months, and specifically in years. And all of that then is why this Old Testament understanding of time is exactly what's fueling this preacher in Ecclesiastes' optimism for life. Because life is full of change and it is full of paradox. We cannot control when seasons arrive. God appoints them. But what we can do is figure out at least the general purpose of a season and trust God's total control in that, which brings, again, both humility, because we're not in charge, but confidence, because God is. Now, all of that, there's an essential truth that we have to hold, which is that while God orchestrates every season, we don't just live with a fatalistic view to the world. Because our faith calls us to active obedience and responsible stewardship, good choices within the circumstances that he appoints, both the hard ones and the good ones. which is exactly where we'll go next. And we'll say that Ecclesiastes 3, I think, teaches us that God's seasons invite us often to adapt rather than abandon. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to be silent and a time to speak. Which brings us back to today's song. So the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy is a fictional story. He's a fictional character. But as I said earlier, it resonated with the audience that heard it because it was a common experience of the time. And so if we look at this as if this was a real person, we would say this. Well, did you hear about that bugle boy? Yeah, he didn't want to be drafted, but he was. He was pulled from that life that he knew, and boy, was he good. He was pulled from his jazz club. He was pulled from his freedom. And he was placed into a season that he never, ever asked for. For him, it was, as verse 7 says, a time to be silent. Not by preference, but by circumstance. His passion was muted. His gift was shelved. And he could have given up. He could have abandoned. He could have convinced himself that his musical career was over and left the trumpet at home. But something shifts in his story. His commanding officer recognizes that the morale of the troops is low. And so, more than orders and drills, it needed some joy. So he gave the bugle boy permission to make some noise again. Not the same way, though. He didn't say, hey, just play jazz. He said, we need you to play this military tune, but adapt it a little bit. Repurpose it. Don't abandon your gift, reimagine it. And what came out was then this unlikely assignment. This boogie woogie reveille, it's called, which is this joyful healing sound for a weary company of soldiers, played by a jazz musician that never wanted to be there in the first place. And it's in the language of Ecclesiastes then, this was a time to speak and it became a time to heal. The company is built up. He starts to speak, so to speak, again with his instrument. And his story reminds us, if nothing else, that seasons change, but our purposes don't disappear. Our gifts, our calls, our contributions may change, but they're never abandoned and they are never wasted at any season in life. For the young, youthful, and naive, and at times proud amongst us. God bless you. And for those who've lived a long life. The promise is for both of us that your purpose doesn't disappear. It may be adapted, but it doesn't disappear. Verse 6 says there's a time to keep and a time to throw away. And wisdom is knowing the difference, which season we're in. And so as I've touched on, maybe some of you today, you're sitting here and you feel like your season's passed. You feel like your job now is to watch other people in their season and pretend to cheer them on. Maybe you're not where you hoped you'd be. Maybe this wasn't the plan. Maybe you feel overlooked. Maybe you feel undervalued. Maybe you feel out of rhythm. Platform, maybe you lost a position. Maybe you lost a sense of passion or daily purpose. And so the temptation is to mail it in. Grieve what was once given, but now give up on what still could be, because that wasn't your idea. Ecclesiastes doesn't invite anybody to abandon. It says, fear God and serve him. That's the sum of the matter. It invites us to adapt then in every season. And so maybe this isn't, sticking with the theme of the song, this is your reveille moment. It's not a season of death, but it's a season of repurpose. Like the bugle boy, maybe the music is going to sound different from this day on, but the song isn't over. There's still a song, it's just not the song you're used to. God still calls you to keep it up, and I say this to every person in this room, with all the different colors of hair represented. He calls all of us to keep it up until the end. He kept the faith right to the end. Maybe it'll be quieter, maybe it'll be differently, maybe a little less strength, but not less purpose. And so the call then for every person, I think, of Ecclesiastes 3 is that we want to walk in God's rhythm. God has set a rhythm. We want to walk in it because life is going to draft all of us into unexpected seasons, both good and bad. We already know that. We have been in seasons that we never imagined would be so good, and we have been in seasons that were horrendous, horrible, and we wouldn't wish on an enemy. And yet somehow God's sovereign over them all, not that He's the author of them, but He is over them. Even the ones we wouldn't choose. Ecclesiastes reminds us then that our job is never to control the season. It's to discern what faithfulness looks like within that time that God has placed me. C.S. Lewis said it well. He said, the great thing, if one can, is to stop regarding are precisely one's real life. The life God is sending one day by day. The seasons we didn't ask for or plan aren't detours from real life. We've called them at times, probably in error, life's little interruptions. I just don't think God in His sovereignty lets life's little interruptions come to His faithful people, whose lives He has promised to be over from beginning till end. Those little interruptions might be, and I would say are, in fact, what God is using to shape you and shape me and shape us for whatever purpose He's working out. God does not waste seasons. And I don't know, but that's incredibly encouraging to me. If my hope is the image of Christ in me and faithfulness to the end, that God won't waste my season. God does not retire His children. And so this season, again, might not be what you expected. Maybe you've been silent now for longer than you wanted to be. Maybe you feel like your main thing has been taken off the stage, so to speak. That doesn't mean your gift is gone. It might just be a time when it's being reimagined. Elizabeth Elliot, the wife of martyr Jim Elliot, said, "The secret is Christ in me, not me in a different set of circumstances." This lady, I swear, everything she wrote was just gold. The secret is Christ in me, not me in a different set of circumstances. Anybody look for different circumstances this week? Did you look into those different circumstances with greater energy than you looked into Christ in you? I think what we're challenged by in that question is that faithfulness isn't about waiting for an ideal future. It's about showing up today. I mean, we might keep the faith in the sense that we never gave up on the dream right to the end, and meanwhile we missed every day that God gave us along the way. Faithfulness isn't about waiting for the ideal future. It is about showing up today right where you are and trusting that God's purposes still stand for you and, more importantly, for Him. You know, it's easy to create this habit and this culture. We do it as individuals. We even breed it into our families where we are always looking over the fence. We're trying to see where the grass might be greener. And then we raise children to do the same because they watched us never content. If God is sovereign over your life, and if your life will in fact know a season for everything, then our incredibly simple to say, but very difficult invitation to live out, to look for God's purpose today. Right where you are. Right with the hand you have right now. You would agree, tomorrow is not a guarantee for any of us, yeah? Any of you for sure heading into tomorrow? I mean, Jesus said as much, that no, we don't know. We have today. And so it might be that your purpose feels faded into the background, but that doesn't mean your calling is over because you're breathing. And so it might just be waiting for a new expression. And on the flip side, if you're here and, oh my goodness, the opportunities are opening, your work is flourishing, your prayers feel like they are being answered, you're finally getting the recognition and you finally are feeling joy again, the peace that you've longed for seems present today. Amazing. We rejoice with you. But don't forget that it was the giver of every good and perfect gift that is now leading you into the thrill of goodness, which is entirely biblical. Be thrilled at the goodness of God. Even in our abundance, God shapes us. We don't have to suffer to be shaped, although suffering is a big part of it. Even when things are easy, we're being formed. I would argue it might even be harder when things are going really well. You know, Ecclesiastes doesn't just speak to suffering, it speaks to every season. There's a time to plant. There's a time to reap. There's a time to laugh. There's a time to dance. And so wisdom is to ask, regardless of what my season is in, am I weeping or am I dancing? I don't care. It doesn't matter. Wisdom is, what does faithfulness look like in that day? Success or ease in life is never a sign to coast. It's an invitation to steward. And challenge and disruption and interruption is never an invitation to quit. It's to hang in there and see what God might do. And so, God's blessing isn't permission to stop seeking Him. It's a reminder to lean in deeper. And what feels like God's hand has been lifted off you is not a chance to put God on blast or on strike or to resist Him until He does something better. Faithfulness is to walk with Him anyways. And so I would say this, that even in your comfort, stay curious. Even in your joy, stay humble. Even in success, stay surrendered. Because every season isn't yours, but His. It belongs to Him. And it carries all the purpose that God's imagination can create. So receive it with gratitude. On the night that Jesus was betrayed, He gave thanks. So receive it with gratitude. Walk through it with obedience. This is the appointed time by the God who does not make mistakes. As we transition to communion, I just want to spend some time thinking about Jesus for a second. And so if we take our sermon in a sentence one more time, think about how is this true in Jesus' life. We read, in every season, joyful or painful, expected or not, God appoints it with purpose and invites us not to resist, but to trust and adapt and faithfully participate in His unfolding rhythm. So as we come again to this Lord's table and we consider Jesus, this whole message is about seasons and understanding the full meaning of the times we're in. So Ecclesiastes 3 says God appoints every season, even the hard. We know that His purposes aren't random. But here's what all of Scripture, I think, leads us to. That it's not just about a God who orders time in general, but it is actually about a God who steps into time itself, into a specific season, for a specific purpose, to redeem specific people. The writer of Hebrews said, He has set a day, calling it what? Today. Today. So enter His rest. Don't miss it. He called it today. It's right now. Paul said in Galatians 4:4, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent His Son. Born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption as sons and daughters. God's greatest demonstration of his perfection came right in a season, right in time, in a day called today. The cross wasn't one of life's little interruptions. The incarnation wasn't out of God's plan and just a crazy detour that he didn't see coming. This is the divinely appointed moment, God's season of salvation. The psalmist says, "This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." It has nothing to do with the weather. It has everything to do with this is a day of salvation. Salvation exists in this space. So receive it and be glad in it. This is the day the Lord has made, a day of salvation. That's the day we live in. And so when we take communion now, we're not just remembering an ancient event. We're stepping into this moment where we participate somehow by God's grace and his mercy in this appointed season of grace that we live in. And we proclaim the death of Christ as our hope in this season, and in the seasons yet to come, and in the seasons that have already been. Joy or sorrow, gain or loss, clarity or confusion, we come and participate in the death of Jesus Christ, the day of salvation. And so as we eat and drink, let's do it prayerfully, postured in a place of reception, recognition, remembrance, renewal, and turning it back to God for faithfulness in this moment.